If you want to be more effective in your work and in your life, and you'd like to have more confidence that you're meeting your intentions, this is where it begins. Welcome to Do Busy Right, helping you organize your information and manage your attention so that they work for you, not against you. We educate you and encourage you by discussing ways to be more effective, not more exhausted. Let's do busy right. Hi there. On today's post, I'm going to dive into the logic of the debate around technology. I think that there's a certain style of argument that happens when technology is critiqued, and I'm going to break that down, and I'm going to show you what that actually looks like and help you draw some conclusions about the style of argument. I'm not going to try and convince you that certain technology is good or bad, although that may happen. I just want you to see the style of argument, how consistently it's used. And in that way, you can begin to get comfortable dealing with this style of argument. So my purpose is to earn a stronger hearing for honest critiques of technology. I think most technology critics, and this goes all the way back, are not trusted. They're dismissed as anti-technology. They're dismissed as Luddites. They're dismissed as curmudgeons. They're basically standing on the corner trying to keep everybody from having fun. But I don't think that's true. So what's in it for you? I want you to be encouraged and equipped to question the rhetoric that we receive from a technology forward culture, and or to be able to answer, you don't use social media X, or you don't use technology Y, or you don't have a cell phone. What's wrong with you? And maybe give you a sense of the style of argument that would help you shut something down. Maybe there is some convincing. Maybe there's an app that is attention addictive in your world and you need to shut it down. So maybe there's an opportunity for you to do that as well. Much like Cal Newport encourages in digital minimalism. And we'll lean on Cal pretty heavily for what we're going to talk about today. Finally, potentially, if you're a boss and you're wondering how to improve your organization's productivity, I would say consider reducing the number of technologies, particularly communication technologies, that you use inside your organization. There's a specific book, again, from Cal. I guess I actually am a fanboy, but anyway, in the book, A World Without Email. And so hopefully this talk we're having today will give you a sense of this is a valid set of criticisms that people like Cal and Neil Postman and I bring to the technology world. So while we're talking, my claim is I'm a critic of certain kinds of technology. I'm a critic of all technology. I want to use what's helpful, good, useful, and I want to avoid stuff that's not, because I want us to be very productive. And I think much of our technology, at least, can be a distraction. It can be an attention sink away from the things that give us productivity in our world. And when we argue about a specific technology, there's a particular kind of counter argument that's used. So that typical counter argument pattern tends to equate general use with harmlessness. And I'll show that this argument that's in general use, this whole idea of, well, we use it so it can't be hurting us, is not well supported with evidence. And when we look at past critiques like those of television, I'm going to suggest that those critiques have been vindicated and that television has proven out to be some of the bad things that critics claimed. And this argument would fit many of the technologies. Not all. Certainly, sometimes we critics are wrong, and that's fine. But we're going to show counter cases, and that's going to establish the validity and necessity of discussions about technology. I do think that we live in a culture that presumes new technology is good and is for our good and is to help us. And if you've listened to very much of this podcast at all, I think there's good reason to doubt that. I think technology is a product just like any other product. And I think that often the goal of business is to make money and sell stuff. Now, whether that's always stuff that's to our benefit, clearly it's not, because people are selling us stuff that's bad for us all the time. And the technologists and the technology companies are certainly not above that by their nature. But I think it's easy to presume that technology always helps. And that's a cultural thing in the West, typically. So when we look at this sort of thing, so first thing is, I'll tell you, you know some about me, but I'll tell you more just so you'll have a sense of my credentials. I've been in the technology business for, I would suggest, 35 years. And 5 years prior to that, I was a hobbyist when computers were a hobby. You basically had little kit computer things that you built. And so I've been looking at technology now for 40 plus years. And during that time, I've had various professional roles. I did a 20 plus year stint as a manager of software development teams. I coded software. I understood user needs, or tried to understand user needs, and build software that supported those needs. And so, on through, the MBA is the business, my MBA is the business side. And then the Ph.D. actually studied management information systems, which is about how technology is used in business. And so all of these experiences have put me in a position where I've developed a fairly deep understanding of what technology is and how it's best used and what it's good for and potentially what it's not good for. And so I offer that just as some background if you're not familiar with my story. That's some of the highlights. I developed the attention compass workflows and technology by myself to meet a need that I had. And when I say by myself, of course, I had advisors and helpers, from books, David Allen, Stephen Covey, and those kinds of people guided me along what was necessary in order for us to have the tool set that we need to support our workflow. When I critique software, it's because I'm trying to understand it better and trying to help other people understand it better. Now, my particular focus, as you all know, is on whether the technology broadly supports our productivity as knowledge workers. And that all hinges on, are we making good use of our attention? Are we able to control and focus and harness our attention where we need for it to be in order for us to do the valuable work that we do for other people? And that's this knowledge work. And so my particular hot button is if some technology directly interferes with our ability to control our own attention and put it where it needs to be. In that sense, there are certain technologies that I focus on and question. An example of a technology that I typically will not focus on and question is, is this a good thing? The cell phone thing, is that a good thing? I think it's a pocket computer. I think it broadens our ability to use certain kinds of technology. I think a lot of times it's the way we're taught to use things that's the problem rather than the core technology itself. That said, it's hard to separate those two things because some things are designed for a particular purpose. And quite often with things like software that we use to perform activities, they exert a specific level of control over our behavior. And that means that we do things the way the tools encourage us to do things. So that's that piece. So technology, in my mind, can be good or bad, just like any other product or object that we use. And I think it's important that we critique technology because our society is so technology forward. We're so reliant on technology and we are pro technology typically. People equate technology critics like myself and Cal and some other names to Quakers who are presumed to be anti-technology. Well, they're not really anti-technology. They use lots of technologies. They're just very careful about adopting those technologies based on whether that technology will support or erode the culture that they're trying to build in their communities. But disagreeing with the use of a technology and specifically pointing out flaws in how a technology is developed, I think is a useful idea, but it's not welcomed typically in the culture. So fair enough. So a couple of things that I tend to beat on, technologies that I tend to beat on, are things like social media, and particularly Facebook is my particular whipping boy because it's the 800-pound gorilla in the room. I recognize that technology can control our behavior to some greater or lesser degree. It molds our behaviors to some greater or lesser degree. And if you've listened to this podcast very much at all, you understand that my argument against Facebook is that it's intended to be attention addictive. I'm not all that interested in whether Facebook opens broader communication. I'm not all that interested in whether or not Facebook supports connection. I presume it does both of those things, and that's fine. But I will say the notion that we all need more communication is highly questionable. Do we need more relationships with other people? It's hard to argue that we don't need more. But that doesn't mean that the kind of relationships that are established in social media are the kinds of relationships that help us and that form community. There's plenty of evidence, for example, that all of online has this anonymity that brings out our, pardon me, worst manners. It brings out our worst attitude. We can do things online and we can say things online that we would never say face to face or in our own communities because we feel like nobody's listening to us. And even if they are listening to us, it's hard to track back to the identifier. So I think there's certainly sufficient evidence for this to be brought up. Another one that I will often critique is the various computer interfaces, or I wish there were various computer interfaces that we deal with on a daily basis. Both Windows and iOS, the two dominant desktop operating systems, are based on archaic now technology. They're based on documents and things, and I critique this a good bit. And I don't want to get down that rabbit hole. You'll have plenty of opportunity to check and see my critique there. But the question of does it serve us and does it help us or does it constrain us is, I think, an open question when we talk about our tools. First, we make our tools and then our tools make us, I've heard it said. So let's look at the common pattern then of the kind of argument that I'll get in when I'm critiquing a technology. So I'll say, technology X has problem A, B, and C. Okay. Cal did a great job of making this very clear. He did a recent post where he went back in his own archives and got an interview. And he was showing in that interview a similar line of thinking to what I'm bringing to you now. And he was making the point that there is this style of argument. And I'm going to take that and move it a little bit further because I think the style of argument itself is heavily flawed. So the way this tends to work out is I'll get into a discussion with somebody and they'll say, well, what about technology X? And I'll go, well, if I am not a huge fan of technology X, I'll say so. And I'll say, well, here's some of the challenges of technology X. Okay, for example, if we were arguing about social media, I would say, I worry about social media because it's attention addictive. And then I'll sometimes have to explain what I mean by that and give some evidence that that's the case. And that's when I talk about A/B testing, which is a powerful tool to understand user behavior and reinforce the behaviors that the producer of the technology wants. So the swipe down, the sit on Facebook doom scrolling for 45 minutes when you would actually prefer to be doing something else. That kind of behavior is reinforced. So that's a typical kind of an argument. And people go, well, technology, there have always been people who argued against any technology, that it's harmful to us. The typical argument is it's harmful to us as a society or as individual members of the society. Other arguments are, well, more recently, there's certain arguments about, say, carbon neutral kinds of arguments. Oh, this technology produces more pollution, right? It's inefficient from that perspective. So these different kinds of arguments. But the typical counter argument around technology tools is, well, people have critiqued technologies like this in history, and they've been proven incorrect. Their critique has shown to be incorrect. And the way this typically comes out is I critique a technology X, and whoever wants to argue with me says, well, technology X is like technology Y from history. And there were critics of technology Y, and those critics have been demonstrated to be wrong. And so then I claim that the technology you're critiquing X is like technology Y. People who criticize technology Y were wrong, so I presume that your critique of technology X is wrong. Okay. And then you people are Quakers or Luddites or too old to understand the technology or whatever the line of argument is. At this point, the critic, so I critique technology X, it's compared to technology Y, it's claimed that technology Y didn't hurt us. And so then I'm questioned as to why technology X is somehow worse for us than technology Y. Okay. Oh, you don't like Facebook because it's attention addictive. Well, 65 years ago, we were having the same arguments about television, and we've demonstrated that television is not attention addictive. So why is Facebook worse for us than television? And I might not be able to answer that particular comparative challenge. I don't know that Facebook is worse for us than TV. I don't think our measurements are good enough for us to say what that is. I'm merely saying that, technology X is potentially not good for us. So then when I can't do that defense, or when that defense fails, I attempted it and it fails, Oh, Facebook is worse than TV because it's much more portable. Okay. Well, maybe that argument works, maybe it doesn't. But then when and if that argument fails, which I don't, was not part of my point, then it's dismissed. And it's like, oh yeah, okay, well, never mind. You know, you're chicken little, you think the sky is falling and the sky is never falling. Now, there's plenty of examples of this style of argument, and the counter argument is very, very consistent across different parts of technology, across the ages. For example, when I was a young computer programmer and learning how to code, I wanted to understand good coding practices. So when you write code, there's better and worse outcomes. It's like people that write prose well. Some are better than others. It's got good grammar and these kinds of things. And so there's a certain degree of that in the actual writing of computer code. It's hard to define, just like it's a little bit hard to define in written prose. And so I wanted to figure out how to do it better. So much like when I was in high school, if I'm writing papers, I want to figure out how to write a better paper, at least as an adult. I'm not sure I wanted to figure that out in high school. And so when I got into code, it's like, okay, well, how do I write better code? And so there's a particular kind of statement in computer code, and I don't know if it's been eradicated or not. I haven't looked in computer code for a long time. I'm pretty sure it's been tamped down pretty good, would be my guess. But the example is what's called a go-to statement. So computer programs have been procedural in nature. And so what you could do is you could insert a particular kind of statement that would skip over code or skip back to previous code and say, oh, go here and do that instead. And there are certain reasons why you might want to do that. Okay. Computer code is branching logic, and you might, under certain circumstances, want to go back and do something again. And there's different ways to do it, and this is just one way to do it. So don't get bogged down in the details. We had this debate, and the debate was, well, we've got to leave it in there because, different ways to do things are good. It's useful in the hands of a knowledgeable programmer to have this statement. And the argument was, it's a bad habit of programming. Your grammar teacher would tell you to not split infinitives. It's a bad thing, and you get into this habit. Okay, now bad, criminal, no. Bad, not as useful as it could be, yes. So as of 15 years ago or so, when I exited programming, it was generally agreed, almost universally agreed, that if you put this particular kind of statement in your code, a go-to statement in your code, that you were a punk and you couldn't. Yeah, I'm probably raising some hackles out there from the old guard, but it produced this code that was challenging to deal with. And so, it's, oh, you just don't understand. You just, you're equating that with something that hurt you years ago. You're just an old curmudgeon. Don't worry about it. And so we argue this style of argument is very prevalent in technology. And before I mentioned television, writing got critiqued, the alphabet, right? The printing press got critiqued, and all of these things, and it's a legitimate thing to critique this stuff. So in these different occasions, there's been a general pattern of argument, and I've laid that out for you, this pattern of argument. Now, what I would say is the pattern of counter argument is really flawed. And I want you to understand how, so that you can see what's going on. So the critic says, hey, technology X has these things in it that are bad for us. The debater, the counter critic says, no, it's fine. Look at technology blah that people were treating the same way, and it's worked out fine. Okay. And they assert that without evidence. Oh, TV didn't harm us as a culture. Okay, well, you say that, fine. So you back it up that TV didn't harm us, culturally speaking. That TV was on balance good for us as a technology. And the broader point is just because it's in general use doesn't mean it's harmless. Cigarettes were in general use for the better part of 50 years, maybe more. So general use does not imply harmlessness. And that's the logical fallacy that I think the counter critic is making. We use lots of things that are bad for us in general use. Fast food is one. Okay, so what I want to do now is to demonstrate that that claim, general use does not imply harmlessness. It certainly doesn't demonstrate harmlessness, because we're going to go take a look at television and the critiques that came out as television was becoming more prominent in our culture. And I think it does have parallels to many different technologies from the communications perspective, but maybe more importantly, from where I want to focus on attention consumption. So I'm going to just outright say that many of the early critiques of television have borne themselves out in evidence. And we go back and we look at the arguments that television critics of the medium of the technology, not critics of the shows. There were three primary critiques. So they all sort of involve this notion of wasted time and attention. Okay. Well, the kids are going to learn to watch TV and they're going to sit in a chair and drool on themselves when they should be outside playing or whatever. There's a very specific waste of time, attention critique that was leveled at television, which is exactly that. It's sedentary. It consumes our attention. It is in some ways attention addictive. And the technology that they use to be attention addictive in television, they got from radio, which was the cliffhanger. In radio, little orphan Annie was on the edge of a cliff dangling by her little finger, and they would say, tune in next time to see what happened to little orphan Annie or whatever's going on, right? And it's the cliffhanger, and that's what it does. And so it's more likely that we will tune in and give more of our attention to find out what's going on. Okay. Now, is this the most horrid thing in the world? This is storytelling. This is suspense. This is one of the ways that we capture attention so that we can make our point. I use this technique. And so it's not universally, I would say, evil, but it does tend to be, I will say, overly used in the media that we have now in television, just like it was overused in radio. So we tend to get drug in beyond our intent. So I think we flip on the television and we say, oh, you know what? I'm a little tired. I'm going to refresh myself sitting in a chair. Maybe I'm having a snack. I'm going to watch something on the television for a little while I'm doing it. And it'll occupy my mind while I'm having my snack or just, relaxing for 20 minutes. And then our attention is captivated. And 2 hours later, we've binge watched 4 episodes of The Big Bang Theory. And so that's what we're talking about when we talk about this critique as a time or attention sink. So that's a primary critique of television from this time period in history. A second critique of television was the notion of content quality. And we know that this was a critique, and it was actually taken somewhat seriously because in order to maintain your license to broadcast television signals, there was a review board who looked at your content annually or so. And if you were putting out content that was bad for people, salacious or sensationalist or whatever, then this board would take you to task over that. And that resulted in things like, if you ever watch I Love Lucy, you may not know this, but if you ever watch I Love Lucy, which is from largely the late 50s and I think early to mid 60s, Lucy and Desi were married in the show, but they slept in twin beds, which was not the practice of the time. And so that was to assuage, that was to make this board happy, because they didn't want to show on television people in the same bed. I mean, you know, much less if they were dressed for sleeping, which they never were. And so the board controlled this kind of thing. But anyway, I tell you that story just to say that this content quality, now, did it have a moralistic flavor to it? Yes, it did. Is that a universally bad thing? No, it's not. Because now we look at kind of where television has gone and the quality of programming, of content. And I think it would be hard to argue that the quality of content, I mean, if you're talking about television as an educational tool, I'm not sure that we need to know about the hot wives of Jersey Shore or whatever it is. I'm not sure that's useful. And in some particular cases, it might in fact be harmful. So thinking about that as well, but I think it's completely inarguable that critique has in fact materialized. And then thirdly, critique of television is a similar critique to much of media, which is how it's funded. And there were significant concerns about advertising on television, and there have always been concerns about advertising. Back in the day, newspapers would not print certain kinds of advertising copy. And the kind that they would not print is the kind that claims, well, our stuff is better than their stuff, because those claims could not be backed up. Certain claims of efficacy, like FDA kind of, right? Like patent medicines and things. The newspapers would not print if somebody said, oh, this tonic cures baldness. Newspapers wouldn't print it because it was an unjustifiable claim, and newspapers took their roles in many cases very seriously. And you fast forward and into the TV argument, and it's like, okay, well, in newspapers, we did it in print, and that standard eroded. On the radio, we did it with just sound, voice, and music, and that standard eroded. Now we have television, which adds visual images to that audio signal, and thus makes it even more effective in getting our brains to think in certain ways. So there's kind of a propaganda level argument about this. Now, I'm a businessman. I'm not going to sit here and claim that advertising is bad for us. It might be, but it certainly is an attention sink. And it motivates the media in certain ways that are not perhaps overall useful for us. In order to, let's just take television, for example, in order for a television network to get paid for ads, to some degree, it needs to demonstrate that people are watching the ads. And the evidence here is now we don't even have VCRs anymore. It just comes with cable plans. So you pause the show or you fast forward. Okay. Well, the show, in most cases, whatever you're watching, will let you fast forward through any part of it except the commercials. And so what's happening? Well, the networks, the television producers were challenged by the advertisers that, oh, we're going to pay you to air this ad, but people are just going to skip over it and they're not going to see it. And the TV producers, networks said, well, we'll force them to watch it. And the advertiser said, oh, well, that's okay. And so now, from the network perspective, they've got to pay for the development of this content, and that's how they do it. And I understand that business model. But that doesn't mean this critique is invalid. So we do watch advertising. So those three primary critiques. Well, I would say critique one, content quality. If you would like to try to claim that television is an educational medium, I'll be happy to take on that argument. So you show me something on television that's consumed by a fair amount of people that is educational in nature, and we'll have this conversation. But you're not going to be able to come up with even a strong plurality of the content as being primarily educational in nature. So that's the kind of content quality argument. The waste of time and attention, our attention, our time spent in front of television has remained flat in the face of the advent of smaller screens. So initially, there was some concern that computer video would replace television video. And that's the reason why networks force you to do location stuff. If you've got Hulu or whatever, will allow you to play television on your computer because they're going to get their revenue. YouTube breaks that mold to some degree, but YouTube did adopt advertising, and you are forced to watch the advertising. I mean, you're not forced to have your eyes open, right? But that time attention thing is there. And so even the advent of computer video, smaller screens, computer gaming, et cetera, has not eroded the amount of time we spend watching television, because that's remained constant. But the amount of time we spend on other screens has completely eroded, almost completely eroded, time spent consuming other kinds of media, books, magazines, traditional media kinds of things, and also time spent interacting with other people in physical proximity. So we look at these three arguments: waste of time, attention. I think it's borne out that we do waste a ton of time and attention watching TV. Content quality, sports, maybe. Okay. And then advertising is brainwashing propaganda. It may interest you to know that even with the advent of computer video and how much video content we watch on the computer, in 2024, traditional video advertising, which I read to be television and network kinds of cable kinds of advertising, the spend was $84 billion. And that represents $250 for every man, woman, and child in the United States. That's a little over $20 per month per human in the US. So companies are spending collectively almost $1 a day, rain, shine, Sundays, Tuesdays, using traditional video media advertising to try to get you to buy things. So do you think that companies who engage in advertising think it's useful. Do you think that they believe that it changes behavior? And if they believe it changes behavior, then why do you not believe it changes behavior? So all of these things I submit as evidence that the critiques of television have been borne out. Now, there were certainly other critiques that maybe have not been borne out. I couldn't do the research exhaustively, but these are three of the biggies. And these are three that remain critiques of television. So let's recap and sort of seal the point here. The point is, I've tried to demonstrate that these three critiques of television have borne out. Therefore, the critics of television have, to at least some degree, been correct in their critiques. Hey, this is something to worry about. Okay. Well, the way that critics of television got treated was this standard form of argument. And when I critique social media, people go, wow, you've critiqued television, and television, those critiques of television turned out to be false. And now my counter argument is, no, they didn't. In fact, if anything, they turned out to be true. In a few cases, it might be equivocal, and so it's the counter critics that are typically not having the facts at their disposal. So I would suggest that anytime you listen to one of these arguments and a technology critic comes on and says, hey, technology X has these problems, and whoever's arguing with them says, well, technology X is like technology Y, and technology Y turned out to not be bad for us. The critiques of technology Y were incorrect. Stop there. Pause your media right there and really assess that counter argument. And try then to say, okay, well, no, actually, that previous critic was in many ways correct. And then we can give the present critic a little bit more of an open hearing. But just walking through this logically and trying to help understand what's going on. And now really to be able to look at this and do some critiquing of technology yourself. The fact that you're a critic of technology does not mean you're some sort of Luddite or Quaker or anti-technology mindset. I am very much a technologist. I've been doing it my whole life. And so I think there's good to be had out of it, but it's not universal good. And it's not good for every component of it. And so I do think that we need to be careful about what we're doing as a society and as a culture. Well, that starts with, I hope that you'll be careful about what you're doing and take some of these criticisms perhaps a little bit more to heart, because they're not very easily dismissed. Now, that said, now you may even want to go as far as to say, okay, well, what is digital minimalism? Go read Cal's book. If you run an organization, you may think, okay, well, what are the critiques of the kind of communication media we use in our organizations? Right? What is the critique of email? Let me go understand that and then evaluate that critique and then make my own decision for myself and my organization and the people in my organization, rather than just blindly accepting that advances in technology are good for us, which is what the counter critics tend to support. So I hope that this has developed value for you and that you now feel a little bit more confident in independently thinking about these things and developing your own arguments and developing your own evidence, because that was my goal for this, was to give you a sense of that. So I hope you're encouraged and equipped to question the rhetoric that faces us from a technology forward culture. And I hope that you're confident now to be able to look at a technology and say, no, that technology is not going to be a part of my stack. And then when people go, well, you're a bad technology user, you go, no, this is why. And it's borne out. And then if you face this kind of an argument, you can say, well, wait a minute. You've got to demonstrate to me that technology Y was not harmful. And then it becomes a more reasonable debate. So I hope that's been helpful for you. As usual, this is the kind of stuff that I work through with people. I help people with process and technology and the use of technology at the desktop level, particularly knowledge workers. And so this is the kind of thinking that's gone into the development of the attention compass. So if that's something that you want to do, that you need some help with, love to help you with that. In the meantime, be confident when you think, well, maybe that's not something that I need to put in my technology stack. And just because everybody else is doing it does not mean it's not harmful. Your mom used to say, well, if everybody else was jumping off a bridge, would you jump off a bridge? Well, if everybody else is using the technology, does that mean you use it as well? Something to think about as we go forward. Well, I hope this has expanded your logical argument horizon a little bit. And I want you to take this, think about your technology use so that you can tune up your technology stack, and that will really help you get out there and do busy right. I'll leave it there for now. This is Larry Tribble, Ph.D. Thanks for taking some time to improve your task and information management on the Do Busy Right podcast. The show is dedicated to helping you think about how to get better at working. And we do this by improving your attention and your focus. I believe that your work is not just about your job, but about all the tasks that you do to turn yourself, your environment, and your relationships into what you want them to be. What we're really talking about here is the underpinnings of becoming who you want to be. The primary way I help people is through coaching the attention compass process. Attention compass is 4 workflows and a tool set that support our information, task, and attention management. I help people with big goals to build habits that put them in a position to achieve. We do this by eliminating wasted time and wasted attention. If you'd like to know more, you can find me on LinkedIn or go to dobusyright.com for more information. Have a good week, more effective and less exhausted. Do busy right.